When developing a true speed program, there's a couple different variables that you want to take into consideration, but one of the most important ones that I think is done improperly a lot of times is rest period. So when we look at true speed development sprinting, and again, from a standpoint of the best way to build speed and express power, sprinting is up there with one of the top modalities that you can use. There's some other things you can do from a power standpoint: explosive medicine ball throws, jumps, Olympic lifts. But from a sprinting standpoint, that is far above the others at the top in terms of a just overall recruitment, power, and ultimately speed standpoint. So one of the most common mistakes I see is lack of having sufficient rest in between sprinting based efforts. So to kind of talk a little bit more about this, it does depend a little bit on the time of the year that we are in, and it could be broken down as simple as, are we working on more anaerobic capacity or more anaerobic power? So in general, when we're looking at what is the amount of time we want to give per yardage, amount of time rest per yardage of sprint, in general, for a high intensity effort for every 10 yards, I generally like to give guys at least a minute of rest. So for a 10-yard sprint, it's going to be a minute rest. For a 20-yard sprint, 2 minutes, 30 yards, 3 minutes, and so on and so forth. Depending on the player, you might need to give them a little bit more time. For, say, some guys that they do a 20-yard sprint, they might need 2 to 3 minutes. It really varies and depends. But when we look at the physiological demands, we want to make sure that we are promoting quality, not necessarily quantity. And I think that's where a lot of guys get into trouble, is they will essentially try to do, okay, I have 5 20-yard sprints. I'm going to sprint it. I'm going to take 30 seconds. I'm going to come back and I'm going to do it again. And that really, at the end of the day, you're not going to be getting true speed development. It's going to become more lactic-based work versus alactic work that we just don't necessarily want to. That's not the goal of what we're going for. Now, and we're talking more of the anaerobic capacity side of things. So these are going to be more sub-maximal sprint efforts. So let's just say you have 5 to 6 10-yard sprints. Well, yeah, you might not necessarily, if this is at the beginning of your off season, you're probably not going to be wanting to, nor should you be going right into full intent, high speed effort. So it might be more a matter of, hey, you sprint 10 yards at say 75, 80%, you take about 30, 45 seconds, and then you repeat it. And this is going to be more of that anaerobic capacity work. We don't want it to necessarily become truly lactic based work, but we're still respecting the anaerobic alactic demands of that sprint. And then as we go throughout the season, we might go, or as we go throughout the off season, say we have a month that's some anaerobic capacity based work at 10 to 15 yard sprints. Then we're going to shift to more anaerobic power based work at say 15 to 20 yards. And then anaerobic power based work is where we are now going to have longer rest rates, because they're going to be higher intensity efforts at longer distances as well. The further distance you sprint out, the higher your max velocity you are going to be, or a higher percentage of your max velocity you're going to be getting to. At 10-yard sprints, you might only be reaching truly like 70-75% at most of your top speed. Once you get out to 20%, you're probably going to end up getting a little bit closer towards your max velocity with an all-out effort. And then especially once we get to those 30-yard sprints, we might only be giving them 2 to 3 all-out efforts at that 30 yards, because we are now going to be pretty much getting up to or very close to our max velocity. So it's going to be much more stressful from a nervous system standpoint, and we want to make sure that we are giving sufficient rest in between. So again, when we look at sprinting, rest periods are huge more than anything. We want to make sure for true speed development, we are keeping it alactic in nature, we're manipulating rest variables, and ultimately when we are having these higher intensity, longer distance sprints, we are getting sufficient rest in between. Quality over quantity is the most important factor here.